establishment, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string, as if he'd known they'd be important someday. As I unfolded the yellowed pages, the brittle paper crackling under my fingers, I understood this wasn't just property ownership paperwork. It was a complete water management contract with the county. According to the official agreement, my grandfather had been designated as the watershed's flood control coordinator, responsible for managing water levels during seasonal flooding that had devastated downstream communities before modern drainage systems existed. The contract language made my heart race. Property owner maintains exclusive authority to control, divert, or drain water levels as necessary for flood prevention and community safety. Signed by the county commissioner in 1923, witnessed by 3 officials, bearing the raised county seal that proved its legal authenticity. And here's the part that made me laugh out loud in that dusty basement. The contract included emergency drainage provisions. My grandfather had installed a sophisticated manual spillway system, underground culverts and controlled release gates that could completely drain the lake within 6 hours if flooding threatened downstream properties. The county had paid him annual fees for maintaining this critical service, money that nobody had bothered to collect in 40 years. I found his maintenance manual tucked inside the contract folder, written in that precise engineer's handwriting I remembered from childhood. Detailed diagrams showed exactly how the drainage system worked, including step-by-step procedures for emergency water release operations. Those mysterious concrete structures I'd always noticed around the lake's edges weren't decorative landscaping. They were components of a Depression-era engineering marvel that gave me absolute legal authority over every drop of water on my property. Standing in that basement, surrounded by my grandfather's legacy, I thought about Sarah's final words. Promise me this place stays peaceful forever. Under this century-old contract, any permanent structure on the lake surface constituted an obstruction to emergency flood control operations, subject to immediate removal. The county would be legally obligated to support my water management decisions, regardless of HOA claims or fraudulent development permits. I drove straight to the county engineering office with photocopies of everything. The water management coordinator, a young engineer named Stevens, who turned out to be an engineering history enthusiast, verified the documents against historical records with barely contained excitement. Mr. Morrison, this contract is completely valid. Your family has been our official watershed manager for nearly a century. When would you like to schedule your next flood control maintenance? I smiled. How about Saturday morning at 11? I think it's time for some long overdue system testing. The trap was set. Cordelia thought she controlled the lake. I controlled the drain. Over the following weeks, I assembled my team with military precision. My old Army buddy, Colonel Mike Patterson, retired, running an infrastructure consulting firm and owing me a favor from a deployment that I'd kept him out of an IED field. My contact at the county confirmed every legal form was filed, every procedure conducted through proper governmental channels with full official approval. I spent afternoons learning the manual controls of my grandfather's spillway system, the satisfying clank of well-oiled mechanisms reminding me that some technology gets better with age rather than worse. Testing revealed the main spillway could release water at precisely controlled rates, while emergency gates could completely drain the lake within 6 hours without causing downstream flooding or erosion damage. Old neighbors who remembered my grandfather came forward one by one. Tom and Martha Hendricks, whose farm bordered my eastern property line, had actually watched him build the spillway system as children during the 1920s. Jake, your grandfather saved our farm 3 times during spring floods, Tom told me over coffee on his weathered porch. County folks always said he was the smartest water engineer they'd ever worked with. Rebecca Walsh, the county newspaper editor, requested permission to document the maintenance for a feature on Depression-era engineering innovations still protecting modern communities. Even the sheriff's deputy who'd grown up nearby remembered watching as a kid. Jake, watching that lake disappear was the coolest thing ever. like somebody pulled a giant bathtub plug and all the water just vanished. Your granddad always let us kids watch from a safe distance while he operated those big wheel valves. Meanwhile, Cordelia's final preparations reached completion, and her desperation reached truly spectacular levels simultaneously. She'd mortgaged everything on this scheme. When rumors spread that I'd been meeting with county engineers about water management, she launched a full-scale assault on reality. She tried leaving a cash bribe taped under the county commissioner's car windshield wiper. Commissioner Bradley brought it straight to my door, still shaking his head. "Jake, this woman's lost her mind. She actually thinks she can buy her way out of a century-old legal contract." When bribery failed, she escalated to midnight sabotage. My security cameras capturing her sneaking around the spillway system in all black clothing, wrestling with gate mechanisms built to withstand spring floods. Not real estate agents having nervous breakdowns. After 20 minutes of futile effort and increasingly creative profanity, she managed to scratch some paint before abandoning her designer crowbar in the morning dew, along with a torn piece of expensive black fabric. The woman had literally left evidence of her own crimes scattered around my property like breadcrumbs. Her private investigator, hired to dig up military scandals, instead discovered that I had absolute legal authority to manage water levels on my property, and immediately switched sides, showing up at my door with copies of Cordelia's financial records, showing she'd borrowed against her house, maxed out credit cards, and spent investor deposits on personal expenses. The woman was essentially broke, betting everything on a restaurant that would never legally open. Saturday morning arrived with crystal clear skies. By 10:30, the floating restaurant buzzed with final preparations, despite having no legitimate permits to operate. Cordelia had decided to proceed with the grand opening regardless of county condemnation orders, apparently believing enough audacity could overcome reality itself. VIP guests began arriving in luxury cars that crunched across my gravel driveway without invitation. The mayor, county commissioners, local business leaders, a reporter from the state newspaper, all dressed in their finest for what they believed would be an elegant lakeside dining experience. Crystal glasses clinked softly in the breeze. The smell of imported lobster and champagne drifted across water my family had owned for over a century. Cordelia greeted her guests with the manic energy of someone whose entire world was about to collapse without her knowing it yet. I stood at my spillway controls 50 yards away, accompanied by County Engineer Stevens, Colonel Patterson with his documentation cameras, and Deputy Sheriff Clark, there to ensure public safety during the maintenance operation. At exactly 11 o'clock, I keyed the radio. "County Engineer, this is the Morrison Property Flood Control Coordinator. Beginning routine system maintenance as scheduled." Stevens confirmed the authorization on the record. The first spillway gate opened with the deep mechanical groan of Depression-era engineering coming back to life. A sound that carried across the water like something ancient and permanent, clearing its throat. Water began flowing into the underground drainage system with a satisfying rush that reminded me of my grandfather's stories about taming spring floods. The lake level dropped noticeably within 10 minutes, causing the restaurant platform to settle slightly as its flotation decreased. "What's happening to the water?" someone called from the platform. Cordelia quickly dismissed their concerns as natural lake circulation. The TV news crew started filming what they assumed was interesting background footage, completely unaware they were about to document the most expensive restaurant failure in state history. At 11:15, I opened the second spillway gate. The lake dropped 2 feet in 20 minutes. The restaurant platform tilted as its supports contacted the lake bottom. Expensive kitchen equipment began sliding across tilted counters. Servers struggled to keep champagne glasses from rolling off increasingly unstable tables. The mayor called out nervously that perhaps they should discuss this unusual water situation with the property owner. I walked to the crowd holding my grandfather's 1923 water management contract, Deputy Clark at my side with official documentation. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Jake Morrison, owner of this property and the county-designated flood control coordinator for this watershed. Under the authority granted to my family in 1923, I'm conducting routine maintenance on our emergency spillway system. This drainage operation is completely legal and has been properly coordinated with county officials. Cordelia's face cycled through more colors than a sunset. You can't do this. I have guests. I have investors. This is community property now. Ma'am, this has never been community property. You have been operating an illegal restaurant on private land using forged permits and stolen investor money. The third spillway gate opened. The lake level plummeted another 3 feet. The elegant floating restaurant settled into the mud with a grinding crash that echoed across the water like the sound of something expensive and fraudulent meeting its final consequence. Catering staff waded through knee-deep mud carrying salvageable equipment. VIP guests fled across the tilting platform in their formal wear. Champagne bottles rolled around the deck like expensive bowling balls. Deputy Clark stepped forward with his radio. "This is Unit 12. I need backup at the Morrison property. We have a situation involving fraud, trespassing, and about 200 angry people in evening wear." The TV news crew captured everything as Cordelia's composure finally shattered completely. She screamed at construction workers, threatened county officials, accused me of domestic terrorism against the HOA. That's when FBI agent Sarah Samuel arrived with a warrant. "Cordelia Blackthorne, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." As they walked her toward the car in handcuffs, she screamed one final threat. "This isn't over, Morrison. You'll pay for destroying my vision." I looked at her restaurant sitting helplessly in 3 feet of mud, then at my grandfather's spillway system, functioning flawlessly after nearly a century. "Ma'am," I called after her, "my grandfather built this system to last forever." "Your restaurant was always temporary." She pled guilty to 15 federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. 4 years in federal prison and full restitution ordered. Her house sold at auction, barely scratching the surface of what she owed. The HOA dissolved immediately after an audit revealed she'd embezzled over $200,000 from community funds. Federal prosecutors used our case as a model for investigating real estate fraud schemes targeting elderly property owners, with Agent Samuel telling me that Cordelia's conviction helped build cases against similar operations in 6 other states. 6 months later, I stood beside a refilled lake, watching families enjoy the first annual Sarah Morrison Conservation Festival. The water had returned to its crystal clarity within 2 weeks of the restaurant removal. My grandfather's natural spring system quickly restoring the ecosystem that had thrived there for generations. Fish populations rebounded. Migrating birds returned. The memorial wildflower Sarah had planted bloomed more beautifully than ever. County officials formally recognized the historical significance of the spillway system, designating it a protected historical landmark. The 1923 water management contract was updated to include educational provisions for school groups and engineering students. Stevens helped develop programs about sustainable water management that have hosted dozens of field trips teaching kids how gravity, mechanical advantage, and careful engineering can solve problems that electronic systems cannot. The floating restaurant platform was recycled into materials for the new Environmental Education Center, where visitors learn about the delicate balance between development and conservation. Cordelia's monument to greed became the foundation for community education about environmental responsibility. Property values increased after the conservation designation. Ecotourism brought steady revenue to local businesses. The Sarah Morrison Conservation Scholarship Fund, established with donations from grateful community members, provides annual support for students studying environmental engineering and water management. And on quiet mornings, I still sit on the same weathered dock where Sarah and I spent 30 years watching sunsets. I kept my promise. This place is peaceful. It always will be. Here's what I want you to take from this story beyond the satisfying image of a luxury restaurant settling into the mud it deserved. My grandfather didn't just build a water management system, he built a document. He took the time to record it properly, get it witnessed, get it sealed, keep it in a cedar trunk wrapped in oilcloth, because he understood that the physical work and the legal record were equally important.
And 60 years later, that piece of paper, kept by a man who had the patience to clean out a basement he'd been avoiding, stopped a sophisticated fraud operation in its tracks. Know what you own. Know what was recorded before you. Read the documents that the people who came before you took the trouble to file. Because somewhere in your history, someone may have already done the work that protects you. They just need you to find it. If this story found you, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe and stick around. There are more of these. There always are. 6 hours before her grand opening, I walked down to my dock at sunrise and confronted Cordelia Blackthorne face to face. Her floating restaurant gleamed behind her on my private lake. White marble pavilion, crystal chandeliers, tables set for 200 with gold-rimmed china. The smell of imported lobster and truffles drifting across water my family had owned for over 100 years. News crews already setting up, the mayor on his way, staff scrambling for VIP guests. She looked at me and smirked. Your little easement loophole from the 1920s gave us rights. This is our spot now. Get over your dead wife's sunset memories. That landed exactly where she intended it to. This was the place my late wife Sarah and I had spent 30 years building our life around. The dock where we'd watched 10,000 sunsets. The oak tree where her ashes rested. And this woman had turned my grief into her personal commercial development project. What Cordelia didn't know, what she had never bothered to find out, was that buried in my grandfather's papers was a clause in the original deed that gave me the legal authority to pull the drain on that lake whenever I wanted. Completely, unquestionably, by the book. In 6 hours, the lake would be empty. Her restaurant would be sitting in mud, and the expression on her face would be something I'd spent months looking forward to seeing. Let me back up and tell you the full story, because this one took patience, preparation, and the engineering genius of a man who died decades before Cordelia Blackthorne was born. My name is Jake Morrison, 52 years old, retired Army Corps of Engineers. I inherited 40 acres of pristine wilderness from my grandfather, including a crystal-clear spring-fed lake that has been in our family since 1923. The smell of pine sap mixed with wild honeysuckle still takes me back to childhood summers learning to fish in that water. My grandfather built things to last. My father tended them. And Sarah and I spent 30 years building our dream there, one evening at a time. Sitting on the hand-built dock while loons called across the water, wood smoke drifting through ancient oak branches, her sketching wildflowers while I planned tomorrow's projects. When cancer took Sarah 2 years ago, I scattered her ashes under the memorial oak by the water's edge, the same tree where we'd carved our initials 30 years earlier. Her final words were, "Promise me this place stays peaceful forever." I gave her my word. Then Cordelia Blackthorne moved into the new subdivision next door and decided my grief was an obstacle to her business plan. Picture a woman who treats every human interaction as a hostile takeover. Perfectly maintained nails drumming impatiently on expensive steering wheels, a white SUV that reeked of costly perfume and barely contained ambition, a real estate agent who had failed upward into an HOA presidency after 3 bankruptcies in other states, a detail I wouldn't learn until later, but one that explained everything. The woman could turn a compliment into an insult before you'd finished hearing it. It started on a Tuesday morning when Cordelia appeared uninvited in my driveway with a clipboard and measuring tape, the aggressive crunch of designer heels on gravel, announcing her arrival like combat boots on broken glass. "Mr. Morrison, I'm conducting a mandatory community compliance review. Your waterfront setup violates multiple setback ordinances." She marched toward my dock like she owned the ground she was walking on. "Ma'am, this property was grandfathered in decades before your subdivision existed. Everything here is completely legal." She produced a survey so freshly printed it still smelled like toner. According to her document, the community property line ran through the center of my lake, and I was illegally monopolizing shared water resources. I retrieved my grandfather's original 1923 deed, genuine parchment bearing the Rays County seal.
Here's the actual survey. My property extends 50 feet beyond the far shoreline. Her face went through several colors as she absorbed the fact that I wasn't the confused, elderly hermit she'd expected. She switched to the particular condescending tone people use when they've decided to make your life difficult anyway. Mr. Morrison, this community has evolved. We can't have one individual hoarding premium waterfront while property values suffer. She gestured at my hand-built cabin like it was an eyesore. A man of your background surely understands strategic repositioning. There are lovely senior communities where someone your age could live more appropriately. My wife's ashes were under a tree 40 yards from where she was standing. Ma'am, my wife's ashes rest under that oak. This property stays in my family until I'm dead. If you have legal concerns, hire a lawyer. Her smile turned to ice. I don't think you grasp how community development works in the modern era. This lake represents millions in untapped commercial potential. Then she climbed into her vehicle, and as she left, this community deserves better than your hillbilly compound, Jake. Change is coming, whether you like it or not. That's when I understood. This wasn't about ordinances. This wasn't about property values. This was a campaign. And she just didn't know she'd started it with someone who had spent 30 years learning precisely how water systems work. The harassment began immediately. Within a week, 3 HOA violation notices were taped to my front door. Excessive vegetation for the wildflowers Sarah had planted. Noise ordinance violation for splitting firewood at 7 in the morning.
Unpermitted structures for my grandfather's original storage shed. Each citation came with a $500 fine and Cordelia's signature, complete with little hearts dotting her letters. I paid exactly $0 in fines. During my Army days, I'd learned that when someone attacks with paperwork, you respond with research. HOAs can only enforce rules on properties that have voluntarily joined their association through signed covenants. My grandfather's 1923 homestead was legally untouchable unless I had explicitly surrendered those rights in writing, which I obviously had not. My kitchen table grew a thicker binder of documentation every week as I logged every violation notice with timestamps and photographs. Anonymous complaints started flooding the county office about dangerous military equipment and potential environmental hazards on my property. Various inspectors trooped across my land investigating these mysterious reports. County health inspector, fire marshal, building code enforcement. They all found the same thing. My property exceeded every safety and environmental standard. The eco-friendly composting system I'd installed actually worked better than most modern septic setups. After his third visit, one inspector confided, "Mr. Morrison, that woman's been calling twice a week for months. Your place is cleaner than most city parks." The man looked genuinely worn down by the volume of Cordelia's bureaucratic assault. That's when I installed security cameras. Night vision footage revealed some fascinating activity. Cordelia conducting late-night property assessments with a measuring tape and flashlight, unknown vehicles drifting past my gate at 2 in the morning, someone attempting to vandalize my boundary markers before scattering like startled birds when the motion-activated lights blazed on. But the real shock came when I discovered what she was doing during her legitimate daytime visits. She was showing my property to potential buyers. I found real estate listings online that made my coffee freeze halfway to my lips. Prime commercial waterfront requiring responsible development, complete with photos of my dock, my cabin, my memorial oak, all presented as community amenities awaiting proper management. The description called me an elderly hermit unwilling to embrace community progress and described me as a motivated seller. She was marketing my home while I was still living in it. Further research into Cordelia's background revealed a pattern as predictable as morning coffee. 3 failed real estate ventures across 2 states, a specialty in targeting elderly property owners near lakes and rivers, 2 bankruptcy filings, both mysteriously resolved after last-minute financial settlements. This wasn't personal harassment. This was professional predation. The campaign escalated when she organized a neighborhood petition declaring my property a public nuisance. She went door to door warning residents about the unstable veteran on their lake,
describing my morning firewood routine as threatening behavior from a potentially dangerous individual. Flyers appeared in my mailbox daily, each more creative than the last. My personal favorite claimed I was stockpiling military weapons, apparently because my grandfather's antique hunting rifles qualified as an arsenal. My attorney friend Tom Bradley, who specialized in property law, reviewed my documentation and laughed hard enough to worry me. "Jake, this woman has zero legal standing. You're not even in their jurisdiction, but keep documenting everything. She's creating a textbook harassment case against herself." Meanwhile, my research revealed she was using HOA funds for personal car payments and spa treatments, and the association's financial records had conveniently vanished from their website right as her personal spending increased. My counter-move was simple. I started attending HOA meetings. Nothing rattles a control person like unexpected witnesses. Cordelia's perfectly rehearsed presentations became stuttering damage control the moment I raised my hand to ask about missing financial records or the legal basis for their authority over non-member properties. Some braver residents began asking their own questions about where their monthly fees were actually going. She realized her harassment strategy wasn't working fast enough. She needed a bigger weapon. Her next move was genuinely audacious. She claimed to have discovered a 1920s water access easement, granting the entire community rights to my lake.
The document looked official enough. Tea-stained paper, a county seal that still smelled faintly of fresh ink from whatever print shop she'd used. At an emergency HOA meeting, her hired maritime lawyer presented it with PowerPoint slides and nautical charts, arguing that my spring-fed lake qualified as navigable waters under federal jurisdiction. I sat in the back row and took detailed notes. Never interrupt your enemy when they're digging their own grave. The 1920s easement was real, but it was specifically for emergency well water during drought conditions, not recreational lake access. The original language stated domestic water supply only during times of municipal shortage and had automatically expired when city water lines reached the area in 1952. Any lawyer worth his bar exam should have caught that in 10 minutes, but I let her finish. Then a restaurant investor named Marcus Samuel appeared on my porch at 7 one morning, holding architectural blueprints and wearing the expression of a man who just realized he'd been thoroughly deceived. He'd paid Cordelia a $75,000 development deposit 3 weeks earlier, believing I had eagerly agreed to lease waterfront space for a commercial dining facility. He unrolled blueprints showing a floating pavilion designed to the exact dimensions of my lake, with kitchen specifications and seating for 150 guests. I had never agreed to any such thing. Cordelia had zero authority to negotiate anything involving my property. As Marcus processed this, we discovered she had approached at least 6 different investors with the same exclusive development opportunity, collecting substantial deposits against a lakefront restaurant that would never legally exist. Marcus became my first documented ally. He provided signed agreements, email chains, and financial records showing exactly how much money she had collected and where it went. Rather than backing down, she doubled down with breathtaking audacity. She organized daily community wellness walks that happened to pass directly through my property, groups of residents trampling Sarah's memorial wildflowers while discussing their shared lake privileges and pointing out ideal spots for picnic tables. Every trespass was captured by my security cameras and logged for legal proceedings. And then she made it official. The HOA was partnering with Lakeside Dining Experiences LLC to build a luxury floating restaurant on what she now boldly called community water. Glossy brochures appeared in every mailbox promising property values would skyrocket once their innovative waterfront dining destination opened. What the brochures didn't mention was that Lakeside Dining Experiences LLC had been registered exactly 3 weeks earlier with Cordelia Blackthorne as sole owner, operator, and beneficiary. She was essentially building herself a restaurant on stolen land and calling it community development. Construction began on a Tuesday morning with industrial barges and pile-driving equipment arriving at my private shoreline before dawn.
I walked down to meet the foreman, a weathered man named Rodriguez, who looked genuinely puzzled when I introduced myself as the actual property owner. He had county permits and environmental clearances, thick stacks of documents bearing official letterheads, and what appeared to be legitimate government seals. Everything looked perfect except for one detail that made my blood pressure spike: my signature on the environmental impact waiver.
Someone had clearly practiced it, but after 52 years of signing my own name, I could spot the subtle differences immediately. The J was too rounded, the M too sharp. My middle initial was positioned wrong. After 30 years processing documents for the Army Corps, I recognized the workmanship. I explained to Rodriguez that none of those permits were legitimate and that someone had forged my signature on federal paperwork. His crew stopped working. Nobody wants to build on disputed property when the actual owner is standing there explaining that the paperwork is fabricated. Cordelia arrived within minutes, her Escalade tires spraying gravel as she screeched into my driveway. When I held up the forged document, her perfectly controlled expression cracked for just a moment. "That's a serious accusation based on what could easily be administrative oversight," she said, switching to corporate crisis management mode. Filing processes sometimes involve clerical approximations of property owner consent. I couldn't help laughing. "Cordelia, that's the most creative way I've ever heard someone describe criminal forgery." While she argued with her assistant about permit authenticity protocols, the foreman pulled me aside and mentioned that she'd paid the construction deposit in cash, insisted they start before final inspections, kept changing restaurant specifications, and had asked whether they could install hidden compartments in the kitchen for specialized storage solutions. The pieces clicked together. This wasn't just an illegal restaurant. She was creating some kind of financial operation disguised as community dining. She had borrowed $400,000 against her own house to fund this project, convinced investor deposits would cover costs until profits materialized. The woman was risking bankruptcy and prison time for a restaurant that would never legally serve a single meal. But she had committed too deeply to back down. She found a new construction company willing to work with flexible documentation requirements, and the building went ahead. Time to find out what my grandfather had actually left me. 2 months before opening day, I finally cleaned out his basement, the task I'd been avoiding since Sarah's funeral, partly from grief and partly because the man had been a legendary collector of everything. Descending those creaking wooden steps felt like walking into a museum of my family's history. Cardboard boxes lining fieldstone walls like archaeological layers, each representing a different decade of obsessive record-keeping. Receipts from 1943, warranty cards for farm equipment that had rusted away decades ago, enough National Geographic magazines to build a fort. But tucked in a cedar trunk beneath my grandmother's hand-stitched quilts was something that changed everything. My grandfather's complete legal files from the 1920s homestead.